Welcome to your first day of two-dimensional arrays. A one-dimensional array was a list of variables. A two-dimensional array is a grid of variables, and you can describe each location in the grid by using its row number and its column number. So they're very similar, but they're a little bit more flexible. You're looking right now at a quick reference sheet, and you can find a link to this page in the video description, or if you're one of my students, in the assignment page. I would definitely recommend you print this out or have it open in another screen as you're solving the problems, because it's very easy to watch the video, think it makes sense, and then completely forget how to type things in when it comes time to do your own problems. With that said, I think it's nice to follow along, so please join me in a little bit of testing here. Let's make a couple of grids first. So the pattern for a one-dimensional array looks like this. Data type, brackets mean an array. You give it a name, and then you have the data type and the length. That's for a one-dimensional array. You'll see a two-dimensional array is very similar. So you have the data type, you have two sets of brackets, which is how it knows it's a two-dimensional array. You can give it a name, keyword new, the data type again. And in a one-dimensional array, that's the length. For a grid, there's two separate lengths. There's the height and the width, and you give them in that order. So I'm going to do something that's 5 variables tall and 3 variables wide. Let's create another one just to illustrate the pattern. So if I did string bracket bracket, now I'm making a two-dimensional array, and each variable holds a string. I'm going to call this letters, and I'll create a new string array. And I've got to tell it the height and the width again. So here I'm going to make one that is 3 variables tall and 10 variables wide. So I hope that you can see the patterns here. In the quick reference sheet, these are all here in the upper right-hand corner. And you can also create a two-dimensional array with any object type you want. So if we'd made game pieces, you could make a grid of game pieces. Before we actually display them, let's dive on over to this example where you can create an array with some pre-initialized values. And in fact, I'm just going to copy and paste this. Well, no, I'll show you typing it in. So let's make one called nums, but instead of saying new, I'm going to go ahead and create an opening and closing curly brace. And now I'm going to create each row in my grid separately. So my first row, I'm going to have 2, 4, 6, and that's inside its own set of curly braces. I put a comma after that list, and I like to put in a couple of tabs. Oh, mine's going to auto-format to be ugly. But you can create as many rows as you want. And the only important thing here is that all of your braces match each other. So I'm going to create one that's 3 by 3. So let's do 99 to 5. So as you can see, each of these rows is enclosed by an opening and closing curly brace, and then each of the rows themselves are separated by commas. So I've got 3 rows, and each row has 3 values. So let's proceed now to displaying them. It would be really nice if I could say print line and then give it the name of a grid and it would display. Just like with one-dimensional arrays, this won't work the way that you want, but let's see what happens when we run it. Before I show you how to actually display it, let's talk about what a two-dimensional array actually is. Really, it's just an array of arrays. And this example might make that more clear. This is an array, and this is another array, and this is another array. So your two-dimensional array is really an array of individual rows. So let's do a little example. Let's make a variable called middle row, and the middle row is a one-dimensional array. And I'm going to use the name of my grid, and I'm going to give it a location number. So inside the brackets, if I give it location 1, that refers to the row that's at location 1. If you remember from before, location numbers always start at 0, so this would be row 0, that's row 1, that's row 2. So here I'm saying, take my grid and give me the entire row at location 1, and I'm saving that into its own variable. And then if I wanted to, I could display it as a string. So arrays.toString middle row. Oops. And let me show you what that looks like. So when I run it, you see down here it's printing 1, 3, 2, which was the middle row. If I change this to be nums2, that's saying give me the row at location 2, and I can run it, and you'll see that row. So this is setting us up well to show you how you can display your entire grid. What we're going to do is we're going to loop over every single row one at a time and display it. So here's what that looks like. We're going to have a for loop where we'll say row starts at 0, and row is going to go up to, well, if we're going to display nums, the last row location is 2, so I want to make sure that row is smaller than 3. And then we'll add 1 every time. And I'll print nums row. Except I can't print nums row because I really have to convert it to a string. So arrays.toString nums row. So if you remember before, nums 0 displayed row 0, that displays row 1. Here we're displaying the row number where this row number is changing in our loop. It's starting at 0 and it's going up. So if I run it now you see it's displayed my entire grid. Once you've created your grid, what you really want to do is put values into it and then look and see what values are already there. So you want to get values and assign values. The way that you do it is you start with the name of your entire 2D array, and then you give the row number you want and the column number you want. And that will let you access a particular variable inside your array. And so if you put that on the right-hand side of an equals sign, that's the way that you look and see what number is actually in there right now. And you could either display it or you could copy its value into another variable. If you have that same pattern, the array name and the row and the column, on the left-hand side of an equals sign, that's the way that you're going to assign a new value into the array at that location. So let's see what that looks like in our program. You see what nums looks like here. What if I wanted to put -1 right in the middle here? What I'd want to do is start with the value, I'd want to start with the name of my grid. I need to give it a row number and a column number. And so for me, I'm thinking, okay, so rows are these things going across, and we're starting with 0. So this is row 1, this is row 0, that's row 1. Columns, if you think about the English word column, it's like a thing that holds up maybe a roof or a building. So columns are vertical, and this is column 0 and 1 and 2. So if I have row 1, column 1, that's right in the middle here. And I'm going to assign that -999 because that will make it very visibly obvious that we've changed something. So let's run the program again. And there you see in the very middle, we've changed the value to -999. Go ahead and see if you can change the value in the upper left-hand corner to 5. Here we go. 0, 0 is the upper left-hand corner because it's row 0, column 0. And there's 5. And let's change the number 99 to be 0. So I think a lot of people are used to thinking about x and y coordinates. So if you thought about an x coordinate, it's an x coordinate of 0. But the way that we're thinking about two-dimensional arrays, you start with a row number, which is how far down. So this would be row 2, and then column 0. And I'm going to set its new value to be 0. So let's press play and see what it looks like. And as you can see, we've got a 0 in the lower left-hand corner and a 5 in the upper left-hand corner. Just to show you one more thing that you can do with this. So this is nums11 would be the middle value. Rather than assigning it something, we could do something like this. We could display it, put it inside a print statement. And that is going to display the number 3. Or we could put it in an if statement. I could say if nums11 is greater than 0, then let's output positive, otherwise I'll output negative. So right now it should display as positive, and we can see that it displays 3 and positive. But if I was going to assign it a new value, nums11 equals -999, and then run it again, now you can see that it displays -999, and it says negative, because when you have that expression, it will get the value out of the middle element, and then check it inside this if statement. There are 2 more things I want to show you before doing a closing example. So it's pretty normal to have a method where somebody's given you a 2-dimensional array and you didn't create the array yourself, or some other part of the code created the array, and so you don't actually know how big it is. You need to be able to ask the variable itself, how big is the array? So the way you do that is, if you want to know how many rows, that's the same thing as the height, and the way that you ask your grid is you say grid.length. If you want to access the last row, you have to say grid.length -1 as your location number, because remember, the locations always start at 0. If you want to know the width of your array, then you'd say grid0, which means get me out the first row, and then you'd ask that row, how long are you, by saying .length. Okay, so you see I've now inserted this into the reference document. If your array is called r.length is the height of the array, r0.length is the width of the array. So let me show you another very, very typical pattern with 2-dimensional arrays, which is you're going to loop over the entire array and visit every location. The usual way to do this is with 2 loops. So you start with the rows, and you say, let's start at row 0, and let's make sure the rows go all the way to the bottom of the array. So instead of typing a number, you would want to ask the array, how big are you? So let's loop over grid. So I'll ask grid, what is your length? And that's the number of rows. And then for every single row, I want another loop where I loop through all the columns in that row. So column will start at 0. I'm going to have column go up to row 0 length, because the length of a row is the same as the number of columns, and have columns go up. And then I can get the value there by saying grid row call. And here row is this variable that's going from 0 to the last row, and call is this variable that's going from 0 to the last column. And now I can do whatever I want with it. I could print it, I could test its value. Let's actually do something slightly different. Let's assign the number 8 to every single element. So what this is doing is it's looping over the whole grid and assigning 8s there. I seem to have deleted my code for displaying the array, so I'm going to recreate that. Grid.length. And then I was printing grid element row, except we got to convert it to a string, so arrays.toString. Okay. Cool, let's run it and make sure that our whole grid is full of 8s. And there you see we've got a, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, height 5, width 3, grid full of 8s. And here you see grid is supposed to be height 5, width 3. So I see that it has worked. Before we stop, I just want to draw your attention to the second page of the quick reference handout, which shows you this pattern where we're looping over a bunch of rows, looping over a bunch of columns, and then on the inside you do something with every element at row column. And then this is similar to the example I just gave you, except instead of assigning 8, I'm assigning random numbers, which is a great way of making a random grid. Here in example 2, if I wanted to place the number 99 at 10 randomly chosen locations, I still want to loop, but I don't want to loop over every single location. Instead, I want to keep track of how many 99s I've placed. So I've got a num placed that starts at 0. And then I want to keep looping as long as I haven't placed 10 yet, as long as num placed is less than 10. And in this example, I would want to actually generate a random row and a random column. And then if there's not already a 99 there, I'd place a 99. So in this case, when I'm generating a random row, I want a number between 0 and whatever the largest number of rows is. And I want a column that's anywhere between 0 and whatever the largest number of columns is. This could be 0, the way that I've explained it to you. Cool, so give the problems a try. This is very tricky, particularly without support if it's your first time. So I would definitely recommend come to office hours, come to our class time. We are there available to help you live. Could be so good. Enjoy.